If you don't start, you won't get better. You have to speak to learn, not learn to speak.
I'm sorry, say that last part again.
You have to speak in order to learn.
Right.
Not learn in order to speak.
Right. You have to jump ahead and do whatever it is that you're afraid to do.
Yeah.
Before you're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And learn to enjoy the imperfection of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be imperfect forever.
Be bold with mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, be ready for people to judge you and not care.
Yeah.
You know, about people judging you. So tell me, so COVID started, you said, all right, I'm going to use this time, you know, at least spend it somewhat productively, put some work into Spanish.
Yeah.
And tell me, like, where did you start? What was ground zero for you? Or what was square one for you in learning Spanish? Assuming that where you were at that point was whatever you got and forgot from high school and middle school, which wasn't much, right?
Right. Wasn't much. Well, for one, I had this kind of perfect storm of like motivation, which I think is important in anything. You have to know really why you're doing this and or really commit heavily to it. And so that was part of it. I had just gone to a wedding on the border of Mexico and the U.S., and everyone was speaking Spanish, and I was like really excited. And I lived in a Spanish-speaking area, so it had been on my mind for a while. Like, I really want to learn Spanish, but I only understand a little bit here and there, and it was frustrating. Then COVID hit. I had nothing but time, and I kind of needed to focus on something. And so I did. So that was when I started. And how I started was the first thing I did was I wrote down on a piece of paper all the words that I think were like the basic words of English, and then said, I'm going to translate them to Spanish. And I just started there. And then I found an app online to do language exchange. And I did language exchange.
With real people?
With real people.
And what was that app?
It's called Tandem.
Oh, Tandem. Yeah, I've downloaded that before.
It's kind of glitchy and kind of like feels like a dating app sometimes.
Right.
But I got really lucky. I found there's a lot more people trying to speak Spanish than English. Or sorry.
Right.
Other way around.
Yeah.
So as soon as I would go on the app, I'd get like tons of messages from people. And it was just overwhelming. But one person said to me, hey, why don't we talk every night? One night English, one night Spanish. And I said, yeah, let's try it. So we got on the phone, and we did that for like 3 months. So, 6 nights a week.
But were you at a level where you could exchange words in Spanish? Like, how did that benefit you when you weren't conversational at that point?
Yeah, it was one step at a time, you know, like.
So your partner, your language partner, knew English a lot more. So you would nothing?
We both spoke basically the same level of each other's language, meaning our first call was an hour, and we got through our names, our pets, and the number of people in our family in an hour. So we were terrible, but we were at the same level, so it worked.
So how important would you say was that connection earlier on your learning journey?
I think it was super important.
Yeah.
And
essential?
I think in some ways, I think I would have found a path.
Right.
If that hadn't worked, but I think that really kept me motivated because we were accountable to each other, and we had to have that conversation every night. So I think it was essential in a way, and it was a lot more fun too, because you're doing all this practice, like you're learning words, you're reading, you're watching Netflix. This is how I learned, just kind of immersive via my apartment. But then it's like the real thing. You're talking to a person, and that made it a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So.
I think, I guess based on personal experience, there's no better substitute of learning language than to find a language partner.
Yeah.
It was the same way for me over COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it was actually very easy to find a language partner during that time because everyone was at home. Yeah. Everyone was bored, looking for something to do.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know. I'm sure you can still find that. But I felt for during COVID, it was, like you said, it was the perfect storm. It was just so easy to find online community.
I agree.
And actually, I had a great time during COVID with hanging out online.
Yeah?
I made so many friends online during that time. Because, what are you going to do? You're at home. You can't go outside. There's nothing to do.
No.
Right? Yeah.
No, exactly. I mean, yeah, there was a lot of freedom and opportunity to do that. But, if you're trying to, if I was trying to learn a third language right now, I could still find those people.
Yeah.
I could still do all the things. Yeah. It just...
And you know how. You can repeat a lot of those steps.
Yeah, that does help.
So, all right. So, you found a language partner, which was critical to your learning process. But it wasn't that, right? It wasn't just you got on the phone and then you chatted for a little bit. What were some of the things that you did?
I kind of developed a morning routine, which I am a morning routine kind of person. I just like to have the start to my day be consistent. And my morning routine was full of Spanish learning. And I actually had a checklist, a little app on my phone of every day I would have to speak Spanish, listen to Spanish, read Spanish, write in Spanish, and I feel like I'm missing one. Oh, and do vocab. So I didn't do anything with grammar.
No grammar whatsoever.
No grammar. I learned grammar as an aside. I learned it as I went. Because I'd read BBC Mundo, which is the Spanish BBC. And I'd read stuff and I'd be like, well, I could tell that's a verb. I know that verb, but I don't know that conjugation. What is that? Let me look it up. So I'd do it kind of that way. And I'd learn grammar that way. But I was and am a huge believer in fundamentally you need to learn words and a lot of them.
Yeah.
And you need to speak. Those were always my top priorities. If I could only choose two things to do each day.
So let me come back to the whole grammar thing. But before I do that, how much time? So you had this checklist. Mm-hmm. How much time are you committing to check these off?
So in my peak, I was probably spending 2 to 3 hours a day, which is a lot. That is something that was made possible largely by the free time that we all suffered in this moment. But when life was kind of getting going again, I was probably spending an hour. And I wasn't talking on the phone every day. I was talking 3 days a week. So there was, ways to dial it back.
So could you say, on average, an hour a day, consistently, over how long would you say?
It took me about 6 months to get conversational, and it took me about less than a year to become what I would consider low-level fluent.
Yeah.
I keep, the better I get, the more I realize, I was not as fluent as I thought, but could speak without breaking my sentences, kind of just, and understand stuff. So
I mean, that's a point of reference, is that it's possible to become conversational and fluent within 6 to 12 months of consistent disciplined learning.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously you're super smart, and it depends how you use that 1 hour. efficiently and effectively. So, it may be a different time. So maybe 30 minutes for someone else and maybe 2 hours for someone else.
Right.
But in general, it's really the consistent discipline of crossing off that list from day to day.
Look, if you're gonna like make the choice to learn a language, you got to make it a part of your life somehow.
Yeah.
So I think you're better off doing 20 minutes a day and doing it every day versus 2 hours twice a week.
Yeah.
Like it's like a muscle. Like doing 10 push-ups a day, you're gonna get good at push-ups.
Yeah.
But doing 50 push-ups once a week is just it's not gonna have the effect.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
That's so true. I mean, there's this quote, I think it's Tony Robbins. I don't even know if I got his name right.
Yeah.
But the motivational speaker guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, he says people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years.
Totally.
But language learning really is about consistency over the long term.
Mm-hmm.
If you study for 10 hours in one day, the impact of that, really is negligible compared to if you over, 3 months, you study 30 minutes or even 20 minutes a day.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just, drastically different.
Yeah. Well, here's something for you. Here's a fun thing to think about. And for anyone listening, like, I used a really simple flashcard app on my phone to memorize words. Every day, the flashcard app would give me 15 to 20 new words and also review prior words kind of sporadically, like not like in spaced out intervals. I did that every day for 9 months and I memorized 6,000 words. Just 20 words a day, consistently. 20 words a day, 20 words a day, 20 words a day.
I mean, so you're looking at what, around maybe 500-600 words per month? So you're maybe memorizing like 20 to 30 words per day.
Yeah. I guess some of those might have been words that I knew already.
Right.
But then that's why I got to 6,000. But I remember distinctly in the app, like, you've now memorized 6,000 words.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the majority of spoken language.
Right.
You don't need to memorize, we use like 20% of English, I think.
Yeah.
The other 80% no one speaks.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, it's so funny when I look at some English learners outside of the U.S., they know all these words and vocabulary. I'm like,
yeah,
we never use that word.
Oh, I know.
Like, can I recognize it? Yeah, but, is it necessary? But.
And it's really impressive. It's cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, you certainly don't need it.
I went straight flashcards. Okay. So what I would do when I would read the news in Japanese is for every word that I didn't know or any, characters I couldn't read or recognize, I would handwrite cards. So
okay.
I literally...
Old school.
Yeah, old school.
Yeah.
And it was best for me because I needed that kind of mechanic.
Yeah.
The writing, the physicality of writing to kind of help me get ingrained into it, just become a part of it, part of the learning process. But so I literally somewhere I have thousands of flashcards.
That's cool.
In my pile of documents that, I just went over and I just kept going over. I have a very bad sense of time, but like, I just went over it until I got it. Yeah. Yeah. Just went overcame the boredom and just like flipped through until I think my thing was I would do it like 100 cards until I didn't get one of them wrong. Yeah. So I would just keep flipping through until I could, accurately say which word it was.
That's cool. Yeah. So you would just do that every day?
I'd had moments, I had spurts of consistency, but I did that probably over about 10 years. Whether some days it was every day, other days I skipped 2 or 3 months. Okay. Yeah. So I didn't have the discipline that you did, in 6 to 12 months. Yeah. For me, it was more of a 10-year journey than like a 2 to 3 year journey.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to learn a language. to learn anything, you just have to like find the way that works best for you.
I feel like a lot of actually learning practical language is not just about the words and the language itself, but it's about the culture in which you use it, the context in which you use it.
Yeah.
So no matter how much grammar and vocabulary you've memorized, if you don't know how to, if you don't know the culture of a certain country, it's very hard to actually use the language.
Yeah, I mean, like, so much of communication is not the words.
Yeah.
And is body language and context. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the culture is massively important. That said, I do think that you get, for most cultures, I think there's some exceptions, but for most cultures, I think if you're a second language learner of that culture, you get a lot of grace, I think. Like, I could get away with saying things in Spanish that I couldn't get away with saying in English, just because they know, okay, there's a difference here. I think some countries are known for not being that way, like France, for example. I don't speak French, so I don't know, but yeah, I think culture is really important, and also just like that's kind of to me that's the fun. Like I didn't learn Spanish just so that I could read old Spanish novels, which is not why I learned it at all. To me it was all about the culture from the start. So it all kind of goes together.
So there's an aspect of making mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're learning a new language and you're communicating with people. Where were you in making mistakes? Because it is inevitable that when you're learning a new language and you're speaking with people of that language, you're going to be making mistakes. Did you have fears, or what was your kind of, emotional state in the context of making mistakes?
Yeah, I think if I look at it over time, there's like a weird trajectory. Like at first, I was very comfortable making mistakes because I was so bad.
Right.
So like when I started learning Spanish, I had learned just the basic grammar in high school, and that was it. And then fast forward to like, I think I was 26 or 27, something like that, when I started learning Spanish. And when I started really trying. And so I had this little base, but I could not speak. Like I couldn't go and order a slice of pizza or a taco or whatever. Like, no way. So at first I was pretty comfortable making errors. And part of that was also that I was really only speaking in controlled settings. Like I wasn't going out and ordering, trying to talk to the local Mexican, restaurant. Because I was living in Chicago. So it wasn't like I had like Spanish speaking accessible and welcome. So I was doing it all online. Like I was talking to people on the phone or on video calls. And that was a comfortable setting to make mistakes. And as I think where it got difficult is when I got better. Like once I got to intermediate level where I was pretty good, I was conversational. I wasn't fluent yet, but I could get my way through most topics. That's when I started getting hard on myself. Like, oh, you made that mistake again. Like, it's not pronounced that way. You said it wrong again. Or, oh, that you forgot that word. Like, kind of getting like harsh. But I just kept talking and talking and talking. I think had a lot of good encouragement from the tutors that I was working with and just my friends who I was speaking Spanish with.
So let me pick at, that insecurity, for lack of a better word, is when you're making mistakes, it sounds like you're being tough on yourself. Right?
Oh, yeah.
You have expectations of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have concerns of, the person that you're talking to being like, oh, this person made a mistake, such an awful Spanish speaker, he sucks.
Yeah.
Did you have that in there as well, or was it mostly self-inflicted?
Oh, I definitely had that.
Yeah.
I definitely had that fear. And I still have that fear because even now, being a like effortlessly fluent speaker, I still make mistakes, and I always will.
Yeah.
Like I'll always mess up, and I still have that. Oh my God, what if that? Kind of like, what does that mean? Like if I make that mistake, does that mean now they think I don't speak it well, or are they annoyed? So I always had that concern, but my love of speaking the language just was greater than that. And my desire to speak it was greater than that fear. And I think you have to kind of like live alongside that fear a little bit and just accept that it's there, and it will go away. Like it will go away. And now, like, even though I do make those mistakes, I'm way, way less harsh on myself, even though I'm much better at speaking than I used to be. And I, quote unquote, shouldn't make some of those mistakes because I'm better. Doesn't matter. I think, there's that fear, but it's mostly personal. I mean, we're surrounded by people who speak English as a second language. We hear it every day. And I never ever have judged them, or like, even when I only spoke English as only language, it never annoyed me. It's like sometimes if we're having a hard time communicating, well, then we have a challenge to overcome. But I mean, some people speak broken English and they speak it well, and you communicate, it's great. So
I feel culturally there's very little judgment to speaking imperfect English. Especially when it comes to speaking. Just because I think maybe because there's so many immigrants and so many foreigners in the country. And America probably in the world has the most accents within a country.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And so there's I think there's a wide tolerance for speaking broken English, so to speak, or just imperfect English, whatever that means.
Right.
As opposed to other countries, you mentioned France, but there's definitely places where broken or kind of, imperfect use of language is judged. Yeah.
Totally. We have, I think, the vast majority of people have somebody in their family, whether they were an infant or still, who doesn't speak perfect English. Like most of my family's been in the U.S. for a long time, but still, when I was born, like there were people in my family who only spoke Italian.
Really?
Yeah. My great grandmother was still alive when I was born. They pop them out.
That's insane.
Yeah. She didn't really speak English.
Yeah.
So it's like normal. Everyone has it here. English is a global language.
I think we met in middle school.
I think so.
So I think we could say that, we've been friends since middle school.
Yeah.
And now we're well into middle age.
I don't know like that.
Not quite. 30's not middle. I guess 40's when you start.
We might be. Yeah, we're getting there.
It's getting kind of close.
Getting there, yeah. I mean, I don't have any hair left, so.
You're getting closer than I am.
Yeah.
But yeah, we met in middle school. We had the same. It was either homeroom or English class with Mrs. G.
Mrs. G.
You remember Mrs. G?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, she made me cry.
She was a stickler.
Times. Yeah. But I was like a little wimp, and also, an idiot during that time.
Well, it was middle school, so. Yeah.
But I remember you were always like, you treated everyone the same. You were like respectful, So, and then we also wrestled together.
Mm-hmm. Then you went to Drexel here in Philly.
Yeah.
I went to the Midwest.
Yeah.
And we didn't see each other for a bit, but.
So let's talk about like your learning journey.
Okay.
But can I have you speak some Spanish? Maybe introduce yourself.
Claro.
Say something to the audience,
See?
Whatever you want.
Ok, sí. Bueno, pues me llamo Troy, soy de Filadelfia, tengo 31 años. Pues, ¿qué quiero decir? Quiero decir que es importante no tener miedo en aprender un idioma. Es parte, pero no ser nervioso. ¿Está bien?
So
Is that good?
You're actually quite good at Spanish.
There were some errors in there already, but it's all
So,
good.
you know the whole C1, C2 situation?
Mm-hmm.
C1's the highest level.
C2.
C2's so
Yeah.
where are you at in that scale?
I'm C1. C1 is like comfortably fluent, can speak. Once I get going in conversation, like there's no effort. Like switching from English to Spanish and Spanish to English is actually kind of hard.
Yeah.
But like if I can turn my mind to Spanish, then I can everything's happening in my mind in Spanish.
There's a switch that goes off.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Which took a long time to get to. Like that's not...
To be able to find that switch
Well,
versus transitioning.
I would stay still. The ability to turn on and off the switch is still not quite what I would hope for it to be.
Right.
But what I mean is that there is that switch. Because I think for a long, long time, I would translate English into Spanish really quickly
Right.
and vice versa. Whereas now it's like, no, I'm thinking in Spanish as I speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, there's stages of levels. At some point, you do have to translate, right? And then I think it takes quite a advanced level of knowledge to be able to just operate fully in that language.
Yeah.
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 So, all right. So,
Yeah.
you learned Spanish, in middle school, high school?
Yeah, I took 4 or 5 years, middle school and high school, in the classroom, all grammar, pretty much no vocab. I mean, it's just really boring. It was so boring. And it was my least favorite subject in school, was Spanish.
The irony.
I know,
English
right?
was my worst subject by far. Yeah.
Oh, man. I loved writing, but Spanish was it's taught in such a way that it's just so boring. But it did give me some good ground, framework I knew the grammar. I knew the basics of the grammar going into when I decided to really learn it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, then I took years off. I mean, like 9 years. And then I started to learn it when COVID started in the pandemic. Like that was when I started learning.
So going back to grammar, so you're very much an advocate. I don't know what you call yourself. You're very strong about non-grammar learning.
Yeah, I think to put in context, grammar doesn't excite me. Grammar, to me, is boring.
Yeah.
To some people, they like grammar. Like they're excited by the structure of the language, blah, blah, blah. That's great. To me, it was all about fun. Like if I'm not having fun, I will not learn. If I'm not having fun, I will quit. And so I had to keep having fun, and so I had to not do grammar. And I still did grammar as I went, It's like going back to like a fitness analogy. It's like if you go for runs every day because you like running, you'll also be doing some leg workout for the run, even if you're not going in the gym doing squats.
Right.
It's not perfect, but you're still getting something. Yeah. Maybe not a perfect analogy, but kind of like how I see it. So
yeah, it's an indirect way to acquire knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I think the English language is a relatively simple grammar. And so coming from that lens, like if somebody says something in the wrong order or says something like messes up a verb, like I still know what they're saying. So I kind of applied that to Spanish. And Spanish is more difficult. The grammar in Spanish is probably the one thing that's much harder about it than English. And gender too. They have gender, but other than that, it's like pretty straightforward.
So let me just put a devil's advocate question here. Isn't grammar necessary for communicating in a language?
Yes.
How can you get away with not putting grammar to as a secondary goal?
Grammar is necessary. Basic grammar is essential. Advanced grammar is not necessary. At least in the two languages I know. Like, you do not need to speak in hypotheticals to communicate in English or Spanish, but that's advanced grammar. So I think basic grammar, definitely you need. I think beyond basic, you can get away with a lot.
So can you get away with learning language where you're not learning basic grammar, but you learn it indirectly through reading and through vocab, wherein you never actually, to a large extent focus on grammar. You're focusing on the other things that indirectly lead you to be able to learn basic grammar? Or are there some things that you just can't get away with? You have to learn the grammar.
Yeah, I think it's tough because you have to remember I did learn a lot of basic grammar in school.
And was that fundamental to your learning process?
It helped.
It did help.
It did help because I knew how to say.
So you can't really get away from it.
You can't escape it entirely.
Right.
I think, and I don't think you would want to. I think why I'm so adamant about this is how languages are traditionally taught. They're taught through grammar. Like,
right.
We're going to focus on grammar, and through that grammar, you're going to learn words.
Yeah.
I think that's insane. I think you should be learning words, and through the words, learn grammar. Because if you know how to conjugate a verb, if you know how to conjugate the verb, let's say, drive, you know that in the past tense, drive is drove. Well, if you don't know how to say drive, it doesn't matter. If you don't know the verb for to get in a car and move that car, the conjugation is irrelevant. And that's kind of the approach that I took with words in Spanish. Like, I can always butcher it and say it like you could literally say to drive yesterday. I to drive yesterday store. That is completely understood. Right? So I think it's not correct. But it's
I love it. Did you put that in there intentionally?
What, that I said understand it?
Yeah.
I didn't put it intentionally.
You didn't?
No.
Oh, that was totally... Wow. Look at this guy. How long have you been in the States for?
Yeah, right?
No, I'm kidding.
I forget.
But not really.
I forget the words sometimes. I will say also, for what it's worth, after I had been... So I went to Latin America and traveled for like a year. And I had been there for 4 months and decided, like, I had gotten quite good, but I had still not done any grammar. And I said, I now need to learn grammar. Like, I really need to learn the advanced grammar because I'm screwing up. I'm not understanding things that I probably should understand. So I took a course, but what was great about it is in the span of 15 hours, like 15 hours, I covered all the grammar I didn't know with a teacher, just like 1 week straight through. And after that, my Spanish exploded because I had all the other things. I had the comprehension, I had the words, I had the fluency of my mouth actually able to say the words.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I always like to tell people that language is a balance. So if you consider listening, speaking, comprehension, things like that, whatever skill is the lowest, that's the level of the language, you have. So if your speaking is excellent, but your listening is terrible and you can't have a conversation, you're limited to your level of listening, no matter how good your speaking is. So
I like that.
For me, it's
Sure.
you can be excellent at one thing, but with language, I think it's one of the few things where balance is just so, it's just so tied to your actual ability.
Yeah.
And the level, of the language that you speak.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's very astute.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So that was a lot of your learning process. Now, I want to talk about just, I think, the joy of knowing a second language. But before I do, let me ask you about your trip in South America.
Sure.
Because you took off, you pretty much quit your high-paying, awesome corporate job.
Yeah.
and you went to pretty much backpack around South America was it a year?
Almost
Almost a
10
year.
months.
Yeah.
Learning Spanish came first, but as I was learning Spanish, I kept wanting to go there, and I would go, I'd go to Mexico for like a week. I went to Colombia for a week, and every time I'd come home, I'd say, this is not enough. So eventually I said, I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to go there, and I'm going to stay there until I don't want to be there anymore. But I was thinking like about a year. And yeah, I went, and I started in Mexico. I spent 3 months in Mexico. I spent a month and a half in Argentina, 3 months in Colombia, and then about a month in Ecuador.
And did that scratch your itch, being there 10 months, or do you still want to go back?
It did scratch my itch.
It did scratch your itch.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, in a way, like my life is both now. Like learning Spanish opened up an entirely new world, literally and figuratively. And so I still love Latin America. I still want to go back to Latin America. But the itch has been scratched as far as traveling through Latin America for a long period of time. Is there a future where I might live there? Maybe. Is there a future where I never once go back? No. I'll be back soon.
Is there a specific country where, if you had to pick one, say you can only go to that one country in the next 5 years, is there a place that you would pick?
Oh, man. My gut reaction, my first thought is Colombia. I just love Colombia. Colombia's awesome. It's so good. It is like 5 countries in one. There's just so much diversity.
Diversity?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the food in Mexico is the best in the world, in my opinion. So that's hard to beat, too.
Arguable, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I haven't been everywhere, but it's my favorite cuisine.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. The tacos that I've had, and I was in Cancun. It wasn't even Mexico, right? Arguably.
Yeah.
But
I know what you mean.
by far, way better than any tacos I've had in the States. Just exceptional.
Yeah.
But so tell me more about Colombia. Why did Colombia come off to you at the top? What are some experiences that maybe?
Well, Colombia was like middle of my trip, so I was really good at traveling, which was a big part of it. I knew how I liked to travel at that point. But also, I spent 3 weeks working on a coffee farm in Colombia as a work exchange. I spent a month living on the beach with a bunch of cool people. But really, I just loved the culture there that they have. It's very diverse, for one. Like the coast, the Caribbean, so different from like Medellin, which is up in the mountains. Like the people, everything about the people are different, which is cool. But it's like high energy and festive, but still mellow at the same time. Whereas Mexico is like full on high energy chaos all the time. So yeah, I just like, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful country.
But let's put that in the context of learning. So, you were at some point of language level when you went to South America, and you left a different level.
Yeah.
Right? What was the progression like? What was the practice of, using language like throughout your journey?
Yeah.
There?
That's such a good question.
Were you intentional? Did you go in and be like, look, I'm focusing on getting my Spanish to the next level? Or were you like, I'm here to party, make friends, and have a good time?
Yeah.
Tell me all about that.
I for sure went in with language goals of like, I want to leave this trip effortlessly fluent. And I say effortlessly meaning it does not require work for me to listen and speak in Spanish. Like, it just feels somewhat like how I speak and think in English. And when I started, I was, high level conversational, low level fluent when I went in. Made a lot of mistakes, was choppy, didn't understand all the grammar, but did know a lot of words, did have a lot of command of the language. And I went out of my way to find Spanish speakers, especially in Mexico, because Mexico was full of English speakers, expats, travelers, and Mexicans. Like, it's just more English speaking because of its proximity to the US, largely. So I went out of my way. But it was hard. I will say anybody learning a language needs to find a way to get out of their language. This might be less of a problem for people who are not native English speakers, but for us, you can find English spoken pretty much everywhere in the world. And so you can always hide in it. And, vice versa. If you're coming from Japan and you come here, you can find Japanese speakers and hide in that. And you're not going to learn English as fast.
You have to escape the language bubble.
Yeah.
Your own native language bubble.
You got to stop speaking your native tongue for a bit. And that happened to me when I went from Mexico to Argentina. I spent a month in Argentina not speaking any English. Like, I spoke 0 English for 4 weeks straight. And in that 4 weeks, my Spanish improved twice as much as it had in 3 months in Mexico. Because your brain is forced to switch. Yeah.
Yeah. So just being fully embedded in that. So
yeah.
Can you give me an idea of where your Spanish was before and after, and talk about some kind of experiences of using language. Did you make a lot of mistakes? Were people judgmental? Did you have a good time? What type of people? What was that whole actual using of language? What did it look like?
Yeah, sure. When I started, I knew a lot of words. I knew more words than your typical intermediate. I would consider myself, like, when I started my trip, I was probably B1 on the scale, B1. But by the time I left, I was C1, which was my goal, ultimately, to get to that level of deep fluency, comfort, ease. Speaking Spanish for 6 hours straight doesn't exhaust me, But it did at first. I was tired because your brain's working so hard when you're learning a language. So were people were nothing but nice to me. I mean, I can think of literally only one time when somebody kind of made fun of me or was like critical, and they were just a jerk. Like, they just weren't a cool person.
It's a them problem. It's not like a you problem. Yeah.
People were super complimentary. I think that's part of the culture, Spanish speaking culture. They're very kind. They're so nice. And they're not used to people speaking their language. Whereas, like, for us, we're pretty used to second language. It's like, oh yeah, okay. Like, I'm not going to compliment somebody typically, even if I think their English is really good.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is like, getting compliments is such a booster for motivation.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah. It really is a bit of a reward. But that's the challenge with speaking English and learning English. Is like, I don't think, rarely do you get complimented for being able to speak English.
No.
Even if it's your third, fourth, fifth language.
Yeah, I know.
Nobody cares. Speaking English is, speaking English is, I don't know. In America, it's almost like a given.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, again, we don't want to go back to being judgmental, but it's like the expectation is that you do speak English. And if you don't, then, you kind of have to work on it.
Yeah. But I think at the same time, while we expect people, meaning like it's normal for people to speak
Right.
English as a second language.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we don't have high standards for what we consider good enough to speak with us.
Right.
Like
I think very few people are critical or judgmental.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, people are not complimentary. Like people are not gonna compliment you and praise you for speaking English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the Spanish-speaking world, especially Latin America, it's not like that. I remember a buddy of mine, Greg, came down and visited, and he doesn't speak Spanish. And somebody said to him in Spanish, like, "Oh, you speak Spanish so well," and he didn't know what it meant. so he couldn't respond. And I just laughed because I was like, he obviously doesn't speak Spanish that well. He understands some of it, but so it's just cultural difference, but that validation did help a lot.
So what about meeting people, right? You're there in a country, maybe you had some friends from the past, but for the most part, you had to meet new people.
Yeah.
Right? You're extroverted, you're friendly, you don't have, that may come naturally to you. But so walk me through going to a new place, meeting people, engaging in activities. How did you kind of immerse yourself not into just the language, but into social situations?
Yeah, a lot of it, at the start, I did a lot of hostels, and hostels are just other travelers there to talk and hang out. There's so many people traveling solo. They stay in hostels, and that's how they make connections. The issue with hostels is that almost everyone speaks English in hostels. So I'd be meeting people from all over the world, but we'd be all speaking English together, often. So what I started doing was I started doing work exchanges through Workaway and World Packers. Those are two big work exchange programs. Work exchange meaning just I would get housing and sometimes food, and I would do work part-time, 20 hours a week. So I worked in a hostel in Mexico. I worked on a coffee farm in Colombia. I taught English in Argentina. Those made up for 3 months of my 10 months just right there doing those work exchanges. And those were the most fulfilling parts of the trip because I was really embedded in some sort of community and often in language. Working at the hostel, I had to answer the phone in Spanish sometimes and talk to someone on the phone. That can be hard. The phone is more challenging than in person because you can't see their lips. Same with the coffee farm. I had to interact and sometimes translate for other people there.
And you didn't work for the money.
No, there was no money.
You worked because, was it for language acquisition? Was it for, spending time and enjoying it and meeting people?
It was fundamentally, it was first and foremost about making deeper connections to the people and the places. Start of my trip, I went to the beach. I surfed every day for 3 weeks. It was fun, and I was interacting with tons of people all the time at night at the hostel, but I wasn't making any real friends. I made two, but I really wasn't there wasn't depth, and I wanted depth.
So let me dig into that a little bit. It was about establishing deeper connections with the people and then, in the place that you were at.
Yeah.
So for me, language is meaningless if it weren't for connections.
Yeah.
Like...
No one to speak it to.
There's no point of speaking a language if there's no one to speak it to.
Mm-hmm.
And so the goal should never really be about language. The goal should be more about creating connection.
Yeah.
Right? Would you say it was similar when you say it was about creating connections with the place?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Like, it is about connection.
Yeah. It's interesting, there's some people who love the language. I get it, you enjoy the art, you enjoy the language. But I would say it's really usually the exception. What people are looking for when they're learning language is to create connections through which that language is the medium.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we were talking about some of the joys of knowing a different language.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the biggest one, language is a bridge where you can cross into pretty much entirely a new world.
Yeah.
And it's really not just about geography. It's much more about being able to bridge into the world of people, of like understanding people, understanding culture and history, and being able to make friends.
Totally.
That's by far, I think, the best part about knowing a different language.
Yeah.
And I would say for the most part, I feel like that's what people's motivation is to be able to connect with people of that culture and that language.
Yeah. It's communication is not about the words. Like, it's about the interactions. So,
yeah.
And building the relationships. And I also think beyond things you said, which I agree with all of them, I was surprised at how much Spanish actually taught me about my own self. Because being forced to speak through a complete different tool set, words, verbs, etc., new language, actually forced me to say things that I had gotten so used to saying in English the same way over and over and over and over and over again. Well, you have to say it in Spanish, and you don't necessarily have a lot of ways to say it, but you figure out how to say it. And that kind of change of perspective in the way it comes out of your mouth also changes your own perspective in your brain.
Mm.
And that was so cool. Like, having conversations about, I'm trying to think, like, relationships. Have a conversation about a relationship, You get used to talking about it with somebody in English. You kind of say the same things over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But then somebody asks you, like, oh, well, what are your thoughts on relationships? And you're in Spanish, like, I have to say it directly. I don't know how to say it indirectly yet. I have to say it direct. Like, that kind of thing can be awesome, because I found that it actually made me more aware of myself just in speaking.
Language is so closely tied to culture.
Mm-hmm.
Is that knowing language, you really start to understand the people.
Yeah.
And the culture associated with it.
Yeah.
Like, for example, in Japan there's very often kind of beat around the bush ways to say things.
Mm-hmm.
So when you hear it directly, in direct translation, there's, it's really hard to understand what it means. But within the Japanese kind of, community and the culture, it means something very specific.
Right.
And so you start to understand really the perspective and the way that people think in a culture. Yeah. And it's just like opening your eyes to an entirely new world.
It's like the traveler's dream is to get to know the culture. It's like why people travel, largely. Not everyone, but that's why a lot of people travel. Like, I really want to have a cultural experience. It's really hard to do without speaking their language, because their culture is through the lens of its language, and their people feel in that language. not just talk, like they feel in that language. So
Yeah. I mean, so one of the joys that I have of knowing a different language is when you're talking in that language in a different country, like nobody can understand what you're saying, so you can say whatever you want. You know, you can trash the person next to you. You can complain about the food, you know, and nobody knows what you're saying, especially with Japanese.
Like if you're speaking Japanese in like Morocco.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Japanese is such an awesome language because depending on where you are, there's very few people that speak Japanese.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to like Chinese or Spanish. You know, you never know who can comprehend that language. Japanese, you know, there's a very high level of confidence that no one around you knows Japanese. So it's like this free-for-all of you can say whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
That freedom, like that liberty, man, it's not to die for, you know, but it's pretty liberating.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you.
I don't know if it's ethical, though. I might not put that in the video.
It's true. I've used it occasionally with somebody, like speaking Spanish with another friend who speaks Spanish, just to like talk about something that we don't really want someone else to understand. I feel like a lot of people learn English because of like for business purposes, and I've always been interested in that because that's so different from my reasoning.
So I think the art of business is there's a connection to language, but the art of business is just so separated as a skill.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the skill of business is just its own separate skill.
Yeah.
Being able to negotiate, connect with people, you know, and make good business decisions and transactions.
Yeah.
Where you can have very limited language skills, but very high business skills, and be exceptional in the world of business.
Yeah.
And another example is if you look at some of the most prominent business leaders in America, I would guarantee you a very large percent of them have non-native English accents. A lot of leaders from India, from Asian descent and European descent.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have, you know, so many people know English as like a second or third language.
Yeah.
And so I think I'd like to really stress to people that limitation of language does not necessarily mean limitation of what you want to accomplish. Like you want to make friends, you want to meet people, you know, you want to do something in a specific country. Language is absolutely going to help, but you don't have to be exceptional. You don't have to be great at a language to do a lot of these things. You can have a really bad hammer. Mm-hmm. Like you can have a poorly, like an old rusty hammer and build a house if you know how to use that hammer well.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to have fancy tools to do a lot. Like, is it going to help if you have them? Absolutely. But you can have a rusty old hammer and accomplish a lot of things.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same with business, is that, you know, the skill of business, if you can perfect that, you can still be exceptional at it with very limited language. That's really, I think, the bottom line if I had to just give one comment on it.
Yeah.
It's much more about your nonverbal communication. How do you smile? How do you approach people? You know, what's your attitude like? How do you express your emotions over, like, the words that you speak?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think even if I think non-native English speakers can even use their non-nativeness as an advantage because they can get away with saying more because the business world is so passive and indirect that, you know, you wouldn't say in a business meeting, I think your idea is bad. You would say something like, are we sure there's not alternative strategies that might suit us better? Whereas, like, if you're a foreign speaker of English, you might just say nicely, I don't think that's a good idea. And that kind of candor like can go a long way, because if you're good at what you do, that kind of stuff doesn't matter as much. And you get the free pass of like, oh, well, they're foreign. They don't speak like we understand. Okay, there's a level of command of the language it's hard to get to be able to say those things, what we say nicely, but it's really indirectly.
Yeah. Now, I will say, we were both in corporate America at one point.
Mm-hmm.
There is a language in that corporate setting.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think really makes work very efficient. I think there's jargon and phrases like things like boil the ocean or like low-hanging fruit. All of this jargon that everyone hates. But, there's a purpose to it. Like if you say boil the ocean, it means like, all right, we need to have more focus. We're trying to do too many things at once.
Yeah.
Right? Or if you say like low-hanging fruit, it's like, well, let's do the stuff with high value, low effort first, instead of, trying to do more long-term effort.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can win in the short term.
Yeah.
So I feel like corporate America has this set of vocabulary that can really make work unawkward and very efficient.
Yeah, there's like ways of politely telling people pretty nasty things.
Yeah.
Or to your point, like boil the ocean, there's ways of just saying things quicker.
Yeah.
I think because I used to work in technical sales, so we would do software demos to people, and sometimes we'd have demos internationally. And I would tell my team, because I didn't realize this till I had learned Spanish, I would tell my team, just because they speak English doesn't mean they understand everything that you say. And that's okay, but try to accommodate that. Because they would use all of this jargon, and it's like, you're trying to communicate, you need to cut out a lot of this junk and just speak like plainer, like speak less business English, more like international conversation English.
Yeah.
And I think the reason I bring that up is I think for those people who are on the other side of that, who are the English second language, just tell us when you don't understand a phrase, because we forget that we're using these ridiculous phrases and that obviously you don't understand them. But as soon as you say, boil the ocean, what does that mean? Everyone in the room is going to be like, oh, of course you don't know what that means, because it's a ridiculous thing to say.
Yeah.
It means nothing in literal sense.
Right.
Like, what do you mean you can't boil the ocean? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So everyone will kind of laugh, not at you, but at themselves for having said such a silly thing to someone who probably doesn't understand it.
Yeah, I used to think when speaking and having conversations with people that it was my job to understand what the person said.
Yeah.
But actually, I mean, I think it goes both ways. I think it's the speaker's job to make sure they're comprehensible and like, easy to and clear and easy to understand as much as it is for the listener to understand what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point I realized like it wasn't always that my listening skill was inept. It was really more that sometimes the speaker is just not a good talker.
Yeah.
Some people talk and just it's so hard to understand what they're saying.
In English too, like in every language. Native speaker to native speaker, like just like what are you talking about?
yeah. Whether it's just like their pronunciation and the way they, their speech, actual speech, or the content of what they're saying.
Sure.
Sometimes it's like, what are you talking about?
Like, yeah, 100%. Or people who can't tell a story.
Yeah, it's just all over the place.
It's like, no, you're totally right. That's a really good point. And I think as language learners, we tend to get insecure and think, oh, I should know that word, or oh, I missed that. I shouldn't ask them to repeat, because then they'll think XYZ about me.
Yeah.
But it's just like, just ask.
Yeah.
Just clarify.
I think there is a balance. So, I mean, depending on the situation, some things you don't get, but like, all right, you get it.
Yeah.
You can just pass through it. You go back to it later, you ask later. But some things, like some words are critical to understanding the sentence or whatever's talking about, whatever's being talked about. And you just have to kind of, you got to go back and I think there is a genuine fear of not understanding it, and so you don't ask for clarification.
Yeah.
I do think it's a very American thing too, because I've noticed, like, if you don't understand what someone is saying, I feel like very few people, relatively, a lot of times you don't ask people to repeat themselves. I don't know, maybe it's considered rude or like, an ego thing. I don't know what it is.
I ask people all the time.
Yeah, I do now, but I think there's a lot of places. I think in the corporate setting, it's like, I don't want to be accused of not listening.
Yeah.
Or like not comprehending.
Yeah, I get that.
I think there's some of that. And also, you don't want to make it seem like the other person is stupid, I guess, or, you don't get what they're saying.
Yeah.
But I think there's an aspect of, there's a hesitancy to ask people to repeat themselves in certain contexts.
Yeah, in certain contexts, yeah.
Yeah. There's an analogy that I like to make is about, when babies are with their mothers, there's a very strong and apparent connection, right, between a child, especially a baby and her mother, and the baby's mother. And there's no language involved.
No.
Right? There's a very strong connection, but there's no language involved. And so, what I like to share with people is that, like, language is not fundamental to connecting with people.
No.
And I think for me, it all goes back to just being able to connect with people, and language is a tool that can help you do that. But if people think, if they have a hard time connecting with people now, but they think learning language is going to fix that problem, I can almost guarantee for the most part, language is not the issue.
Yeah.
You can very much learn to connect with people, have a good time, hang out, enjoy people's company without the mastery of language.
Yeah.
I think people forget that a lot.
Yeah, 100%. Smiling and listening are two, like, really important parts of communication, and they don't require words. Like, listening in particular is best done by not speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Smiling's huge. I think when we first set out to learn a language, we think of like a destination of, I'm going to get to this point, and once I do, I'll be done, and it'll be great. And I think that's true and false. I think there will be a point that you get to where you'll never lose it. Like, my Spanish is rusty relative to what it was when I left Latin America. But if somebody starts speaking Spanish to me, I immediately understand all of it, and I can speak back to them. A little bit of errors, but I've gotten to that point where I won't just lose it. I can't lose it.
It's like riding a bicycle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
However, I think the idea that it's a destination also is wrong. You are constantly learning. Like, I'm always learning new words. I'm always learning little things to improve. And I'll never feel like a native speaker because I'm not. So I think kind of putting that in perspective and saying, like, the way you speak English today is good enough to speak English, even if it's zero. Like, just start. Just start. If you don't start, you won't get better. You have to speak to learn, not learn to speak.
I'm sorry, say that last part again?
You have to speak in order to learn.
Right.
Not learn in order to speak.
Right. There's rarely do you find moments where it's enough. I know English or Spanish or Japanese. I know enough to be able to do something. Rarely, do we have moments where we feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's oftentimes a lot later when you feel that way, but during the process, it's very, you kind of have to just skip. You have to jump ahead and do whatever it is that you're afraid to do before you're ready.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And learn to enjoy the imperfection of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be imperfect forever.
Be bold with mistakes.
Yeah.
Be ready for people to judge you and not care, about people judging you. There's this quote that I really like. It's called, "Do the scary thing first, then get scared after."
Yeah.
Which is, can be construed in different ways, but I think it works for me.